Hi, guys, and happy Thursday. Welcome back to another episode of the Get Your Popcorn podcast. I have a big week for you guys. Today is Happen One Night. I'll be releasing, and then tomorrow there's a little bonus episode because it's Valentine's Day with True Romance. So it's a big week for this podcast. I'm doing back-to-back recordings today. Well, I'll probably look a little bit different because I still have to watch the movie True Romance again. I haven't seen it in a little while. So I'll be watching that. I watched It Happened One Night last night, actually. It all happened one night. I watched it with my husband, who had never seen it before. As you guys know, anybody who listens to this a lot, Owen has been long suffering through this. And so it's been kind of fun to see him get to see these films for the first time. Some of these ones that I've loved for a really long time. It Happened One Night is a movie I've really enjoyed since I saw it when I was about 16. But it's always kind of a hard sell to your partner to be like, hey, do you want to watch this movie from 1934? They usually know. But he agreed and ended up really liking the film. And I think that's kind of the tricky thing with black and white or older movies, is that people don't understand that films from this time have the same quality and oftentimes better quality than the ones that are being released now in studios. Back in the 1990s and the sort of this early filmmaking, this is pretty early into movies with sound, less than 10 years into sound in film, or talking at least. So you should be able to put music over afterwards, but they weren't able to capture the sound with cameras and booms at the time. So we're still into this new technology. So there's a lot of care being put into older Hollywood films that we don't see today, and studios aren't producing the same amount of films per year with the same like hefty budgets that they are now. They're producing 5 movies a year, a lot less. They've got their big stars, but they're all kind of really quality stars, and the different studios are bargaining with the different actors because at this point all the actors are under contracts instead of like independently contracted out. So this is an interesting time in film. A lot of care is being taken to create these projects. This movie's released in 1934, so we're in the middle of the Depression, and a lot of the documentation from this time in regards to like Hollywood and Hollywood studios is that people really wanted a distraction from what was going on around them. They wanted these like lighter kind of comedies, something to kind of escape when going to the theater. So there was a lot of these called screwball comedies coming out at the time, and that's what this falls under. But to me, this kind of feels like the very first ever romantic comedy when they were still good, before they descended into the madness that is Jennifer Aniston films. So this was definitely like a difficult kind of sell to my husband, but once he watched it, he really liked it. Part of that is that Clark Gable's in this film. He's also seen Gone with the Wind, which is like Clark Gable's biggest film. It's still the biggest film that's ever been released of all time if you adjust it to inflation. So if Clark Gable's in a movie, he'll often be okay watching it because Clark Gable's really good and really charming and definitely makes the movie worth watching even if it's not the greatest. The Misfits in the 60s, not a good movie, but Clark Gable's good in it. Anyway, so this was what we watched last night, and he really enjoyed it. And I think if you are a kind of person who is reluctant into watching black and white films, this is a really good one to start with. It's good. The jokes hold up today. It translates well. There's a couple of things that don't in terms of the way like men and women interact with each other. At certain points, Clark Gable's character is able to like engage in these like casually domestic violence-y kind of jokes that none of the other characters really register as being like a problem, which doesn't fit in the 2024 lens, but it's easy enough to, because it is like his character is kidding, it's not like shocking or anything. It's just like you notice that the background characters don't react in the way that they would in like a 2020, I guess 2025 now lens. So there's a bit of that. There's also a little bit of some of the guys are kind of catcalling and harassing this woman for a little bit in it, which unfortunately still happens today. So it's not, they just are using like slightly different 1930s language, but it's the same shit. So that's good that nearly 100 years later we've made no improvements. We've just done a lateral movement to different words. Actually, we might even have gone down because they're a little more derogatory now than the cleaner language at the time of the 30s. So that's great to see. Love that for all of womankind. But the film was really good. The second film I've done by Frank Capra, the first being It's a Wonderful Life. This is the first movie I've done with Clark Gable, but February 1st and 28th will be the Gone with the Wind release. So that'll be 3 weeks of Clark Gable. So that's pretty great, ladies. So this was released February 22nd of 1934, shortly after Valentine's Day. So this movie at the time of release will be 90, can I do math in my head? 91 years old. This is a 91-year-old film. It holds up, I swear. It had a budget of $325,000 and made $2.5 million worldwide. That is, of course, in 1934 dollars. It is widely considered to be one of the greatest films ever made. It's on the AFI's Top 100. It's on their Top 100 Laughs as well, which is like a subsection of the group, and it ranks number 8 on that. It won 5 major Academy Awards. It was the first to do so, with Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actor, and Best Adapted Screenplay. This is based on a short story called The Night Bus. So the main sort of cast members in this film are Clark Gable, who plays Peter Warren. He is this reporter that sort of gets into this hijinks with this wealthy heiress named Ellie or Ellen, and that's played by Claudette Colbert. Her father's played by Walter Connolly. There's a sort of guy that they meet along the way that harasses Ellen a little bit, and his name is Oscar Shapley, and that's played by Roscoe Carnes. Ellen's love interest in the film is King Wesley, and that's played by Jameson Thomas. And those are kind of like the bigger cast members in the film. There's lots of like little characters that kind of pop in and out or on screen for like a minute or two, but those are the central characters to the story. Essentially, the big story, the overarching story is Ellen, who's a wealthy heiress who is trying to go and marry her boyfriend, or she's had a quick marriage, but she wants to go and have a wedding and be with her new husband, who her father doesn't like. He's trying to get their marriage annulled, so she runs away and tries to get across the country before he finds her. And along the way, she meets Peter Warren, which is played by Clark Gable. Hijinks ensue. So that's the premise of the film. So we'll get in a little bit to the production of the film. Neither of the two stars of the film wanted to be in it. Claudette Colbert, I hope I am saying her name right. I think so. I'm going along the lines of Stephen Colbert. I'm going to roll with it, guys, okay? She didn't want to be in the film because she had had a bad experience with Frank Capra, who was the director, and he didn't want to work with her either. They had a film together that bombed, so they didn't have a lot of interest. There was a number of actresses that either read for the part or rejected the part. Margaret Sullivan rejected the part. Betty Davis wanted the role, but she was under a different contract. Carole Lombard couldn't accept because she was at a conflict with another role that she was in. Interestingly enough, Carole Lombard ended up being Clark Gable's wife like 5 years later, but they hadn't met at this time. Colbert was eventually convinced to do the film under the conditions that she was paid $50,000 for the role and that they could film the whole movie with her scenes in just 4 weeks. Clark Gable was really against doing this film, so he was actually sent to do this as a punishment from his own studio, MGM, and lent to Columbia Pictures as a punishment for refusing to do a film for MGM. So Clark Gable did not want to be a part of this film whatsoever. He's gone on record a number of times saying that he doesn't like these kind of movies. He was reluctant to do Gone with the Wind for the same sort of romantic qualities that this film entails, but he was sort of loaned out against his will because, again, at this time, actors are under contract and they're being paid salary, as opposed to being paid per picture deals. So it's a little bit different than how the system works now. There was many changes made to the script along the way of the production. Both Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert were very unhappy, and there was changes made as they were filming, and the script partially was a reason that a lot of actresses had rejected the film initially when being offered the role. The final product looked a lot different than the initial production idea for the film. Claudette Colbert and Frank Capra had many altercations. He called them mini temper tantrums along the way of the filming because she did not want to work with him. And was upset with him about the failure of the movie they had had in 1927. He later said that she was great in the part, but he did, talk a lot of smack about her in the press, about being difficult to work with. But I feel like anytime a woman in Hollywood advocates for herself, she's labeled difficult. So take that with what you will. So the film was met with mostly positive praise when it came out. The New York Times called it a good piece of fiction, which with all its feverish stunts is blessed with a bright dialogue and a good quota of a relatively restrained scenes. Colbert's performance was described as lively and engaging, and Gable is excellent. Film Daily praised it a lively yarn, fast-moving, plenty humorous, racy enough to be tantalizing, and yet perfectly decorous. During its initial run, it was moderately successful during its initial release, but upon wide release with smaller movie houses, smaller audiences, it became an absolute smash box office success. It currently holds a 98% average score from critics on Rotten Tomatoes. And like I said, it was nominated and won the 5 major categories. So I kind of love that for Clark Gable, that he was sent to Columbia to do a picture as a punishment and came back with an Oscar. So like I said, this is on the top 100 films of all time. It's ranked number 35 for 100 laughs. It's number 8 for 100 passions. It's 38. And for top 10 romantic comedies, it is ranked number 3. So this film had a major impact on pop culture and culture as a whole. Clark Gable's character in this actually spawned the idea for Bugs Bunny. The animator Fritz Freleng, who was involved in the creation of Bugs Bunny, came out in 1940, said that he was influenced by Clark Gable's character. Fritz Freleng helped develop the character of Bugs Bunny. There's a couple of moments in It Happened One Night, if you go back through and you think about the creation of Bugs Bunny. There's a scene where Clark Gable's character calls a different character Doc. That's one for Bugs Bunny. There's a famous scene where he's sitting and he's eating carrots and kind of talking shit. That's like Bugs Bunny's whole shtick. And then there's an imaginary character that Clark Gable makes up when he's talking to one of the other characters and kind of threatening him, named Bugs Dooley. So that those little pieces all came together in the creation of Bugs Bunny, and then was put through during the animation. And there is actually early Bugs Bunny cartoons that make fun of Clark Gable too. So that's a huge impact on pop culture if we think what has happened like with Bugs Bunny as a whole. Which is a cartoon created in 1940 that if you ask a 4-year-old to point out, they'll be like, yeah, that's Bugs Bunny right there. So this movie had like a kind of a drop in the pond effect on pop culture. There's also a scene in the film where Clark Gable is undressing and he doesn't wear an undershirt because typically at the time men would wear the dress shirt and then they'd wear kind of like a white tank top or, for lack of a better term, a wife beater underneath. But he doesn't. He just has the shirt. And sort of as a legend goes, undershirt sales dropped drastically at this time after seeing this movie because Clark Gable didn't wear an undershirt. Whether or not this is like totally true, it is something that's like talked about in kind of like a urban legend myth of the film, but it hasn't actually been outright like stated as no, this isn't true. So I kind of like to roll with it because how cool is that? And also another contributing factor at this time is it's the Great Depression, so if you only have to buy one shirt, you're probably just going to buy the one shirt. But I digress. Okay, so let's get into the plot. So the film opens up with Ellen Andrews, and she's having an argument with her father. Ellen has just gone and eloped with a pilot and kind of this adventure fortune hunter, they call him. I don't really know what that means. I don't know if they mean like a gangster or like what's going on. But he's like quite kind of a name for himself in the papers. He's sort of a famous guy that she's met. Anyway, her father, Alexander Andrews, hates this guy and he's kind of trapped her on this boat with him and she's trying to convince her to have the wedding annulled. Alexander Andrews is worth a ton of money and he's trying to convince her that Wesley's only interested in her as because she is like the next fortune to be hunted, that he's only in it for the money, that he could easily pay this guy off, that he doesn't really love Ellen. And Ellen is not convinced. She's throwing dishes all over the place. She's very upset. There's a moment where he slaps her to calm her down. And this is always very jarring if you watch an old movie that they just like, if a woman is being hysterical, they just slap her in the face and she kind of like comes to it. I don't know, any woman now that if you slapped her in the face, you wouldn't get like a good old punch back. But it's the movies from the 30s, so you kind of have to just go with that's what was happening 91 years ago. So he just says he's not going to take her back. He's going to keep her on the boat. And so Ellen dives off the side of the boat and swims to shore. We then cut to a scene at a bus station. This is where Ellen has escaped to. Her plan is to take a bus from where she is to New York City. To go and meet King Wesley. And who else is at this station but Peter Warren, who is a reporter for a newspaper in New York. He appears to be drunk and having this kind of fight in a telephone booth over the phone with his boss, who then fires him. So he's out of a job. And he's also going to take this bus back to New York City to kind of figure out what he's going to do. Peter and her get onto the bus, and he has this sort of altercation initially with the bus driver because there's all these newspapers on where Peter's supposed to be sitting, and Peter throws them out of the window. And the bus driver kind of gets mad at him and is threatening him, and he keeps saying, "Oh yeah," and then Peter Warren will respond, "Oh yeah." Peter Warren will respond, and eventually Peter Warren goes, "You got me, yeah." So he's kind of got this like sarcastic kind of like, I don't care sort of attitude. I very much feel like if this movie was made now, Robert Downey Jr. would be great. Actually, Robert Downey Jr. in 2008, because I think he's too old to play the role now. But Robert Downey Jr.'s kind of style of humor would have translated really well into this character. So sort of that kind of a vibe that he's given off while he's having this fight, Peter Warren, with the bus driver. Ellie comes in and she takes the empty seat that he's thrown the newspapers off of, and Peter Warren is visibly annoyed and tells her to get out of his seat, and she doesn't, so he says, "Okay, this is a seat for two then," and they're kind of smashed in the bus seat together. So while this is all happening and she's trying to escape to New York, her father, who has all this money, has flooded the media with like a missing announcement that they're on a hunt. He's offered this $10,000 reward for her. And so Peter Warren is reading the newspaper and figures out who he's sitting next to. And he decides to confront her. He's out of a job and he needs a reason for a newspaper to hire him back. So he strikes a deal with her and he says, "I'll help you get to King Wesley if I get the exclusive on your story when we get there. If you don't give me the exclusive, I will call your father and tell him where you are right now and you won't make it." So he blackmails her into this plan. She agrees because mostly she has to, but she also just wants to get back to her husband. So they're making these stops along the way, and Ellie decides that she wants to move away from Peter at one point, and she sits down next to a different guy named Oscar Shapley, and he hits on her egregiously. Like, he's like harassing her, and she's not getting the hit, and she's like brushing him off. And then finally Peter steps in and basically says, "Don't talk to my wife that way." And then this Oscar Shapley guy is, profusely apologizes, not because he harassed her, but only because she's married and he harassed her. So then Ellie goes back to sit with Peter. And then during their drive, the weather's getting very bad and the road washes out, so the bus has to stop at these cabins for everyone to stay overnight. And because now everybody thinks that Peter and Ellie are married, they have to stay in a cabin together. So this is where we get kind of the famous undressing scene, where he's explaining, Clark Gable's getting undressed and he's explaining that no two men do it alike, and he's just sort of trying to bother her. Like, I just feel like a good portion of this film is him just trolling her. And then he's explaining that no two men do it alike, and he's undressing the shirt and his shoes, and then he tells her that he's going to take off his pants, and she kind of darts away. And he puts up this string and a big blanket to put a barrier off between the two twin beds, and he calls it the Wall of Jericho, and he tells her that that's going to keep her safe. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Bible, it's a story of the Israelites marching around the walls of Jericho for 6 days, and on the seventh day the priests blew their horns and the people shouted, and the wall fell down, and then the Israelites were able to rush into the promised land. So I think this is just a little bit of foreshadowing, saying that, this wall is up between us right now, but it's going to come down, and that is where we're supposed to be. So in the next morning, they're having breakfast together, and they're getting ready, and they're kind of starting to get along. They're enjoying each other's company. He calls her brat because she's very particular. She's this wealthy heiress, and there's lots of things she doesn't want to do, but he's teasing her about it. She kind of likes being teased, and she's warming up. He's teaching her how to dunk a donut properly. Like, it's very cute. He's making her eggs. And then these detectives come, and they're banging on all the doors of the cabin because they're looking for Ellie. Her father's, of course, reported her missing. It's a front page headline. She's this wealthy socialite. So they kind of like spring into this little like improv scene where the police come in and she's brushing her hair, but it's kind of over her face so they can't see her. Detectives are trying to come up to talk to her, and he comes up and he gets mad at them. He's like, why are you talking to my wife? And he starts getting angry and jealous. And then she starts yelling at him like, oh, this is just like last time when this guy was talking to me. And he said, well, why was he talking to me? And then she's like, you were drunk. Nothing happened. And he starts screaming and having this like horrible fake fight in front of these detectives. And these detectives are like, oh my God. And he like winds up and pretends to like he's like makes kind of like a flinch, like he might hit her, and then he just starts screaming at her, quit bawling, and she's crying, and it's just over the top. It's so funny because it just like they were just having breakfast, and it just switches on a dime to this absolute fake fight that they're supposed to not have had, any prep for. This is like, they've just jumped into this, playing off of each other. So the detectives profusely apologize and kind of leave them alone. And the two of them are just like laughing their heads off. But this is the moment where they could kind of click, like, oh, we kind of get along. Like, we really have like something here, like that we could do this. And they like make each other laugh. So following this, they get back onto the bus. And then this Oscar Shapley guy that was harassing her is reading the newspaper, and they've printed Ellie's picture. And so he realizes who she is and that there's this $10,000 reward attached to him, or attached to her, if he turns her in. And so he approaches Peter and says, I know who you're with. Let's split it. And then Peter, and this is where he creates up the fake character named Bugs, pretends to be part of the mafia and essentially says, we're going to kill your family if you say anything about Ellie. I'm trying to deliver her to my boss. So I'm going to kill your family if you say anything. And he runs off. Just runs right off. Peter and Ellie then start hitchhiking as this bus breaks down, and they go. And there's this really cute scene where he's trying to get her over the river, and he throws her over his shoulder, and she says, oh, you're giving me a piggyback ride. And he is explaining that rich people know nothing of piggybacking, and lists all these people who would have been like a natural piggyback. It's just like this. It's just a silly, stupid conversation, but like the dialogue's really quick and it's really funny. And there's a moment where she's kind of arguing with him, and he's got her over his shoulder, and he says, okay, hold this for a second. He gives her the suitcase, so he's got a free hand, and he smacks her on the butt and then takes the suitcase back, which my husband thought was the highlight of the movie for him. He thought that was so funny. But I don't know, like they're playing off of each other, and there's just this like warmth and kind of like flirting fun between them. Like you just kind of see that there's this spark romantically between them, but it seems like they're also like developing this like really great friendship. It's just nice. Like it's fun to watch. Like you feel quite warm watching this movie. So then we go back to Ellie's father, Alexander Andrews, and he's decided that the only way that he's going to get Ellie back is if he makes peace with King Wesley, the fiance or the husband. He's kind of both. And so he reaches out to him and he says, I need you to make an announcement saying that we've worked something out and to tell her to come home. So Ellie does see this in the newspaper, but it doesn't actually propel her to go home any further or to cut off the deal with Peter. She just kind of sees it. But it doesn't move her forward or faster in any way because she is realizing that she has feelings for Peter. There's this really great scene while they're hitchhiking where Peter is showing her the different ways you can move your thumb. There's like a slow one. You got to make it look like you don't really need to be picked up. And Ellie says, oh, I've got my own way and I don't have to use my thumb. And so she goes out to the side of the road and she just lifts up her skirt and sticks her leg out. And of course, this is 1934, so that's rather scandalous. And of course, a truck or a car comes by and picks them up. So they go from there and they go to these little cabins and they lie about staying a week and that they'll pay at the end of the week. But of course, they're going to leave in the middle of the night. And during this like last kind of night that they're going to have together, because they'll be at New York in the morning, Ellie confesses her love for Peter. He doesn't really respond and she goes to sleep, but he realizes he loves her too. So he takes the car, leaves her there, runs to New York to write his article to give to his boss so that he can have enough money to buy an engagement ring, and then race back to the cabin to see Ellie. But of course, in the middle of the night, the people that own the cabin think that they've left and skipped without paying. She doesn't have any money. So the people come in, they wake her up. She realizes that Peter has just left her. She thinks that he's left her for the reward and is turning her in. She doesn't have any money, so they boot her out. So she then calls her father and goes back to New York. And feels like Peter has just abandoned her. So she gets back to New York and she has her wedding. It's her wedding day. And she confesses her love to her father for Peter. But Peter has contacted her father wanting his money. And she thinks that he has contacted her for the $10,000 reward. And she's extremely upset with him. She doesn't want to see him. She wants nothing to do with him. But she does confess to her father that she does love him. Peter then meets with the father. He doesn't want to come to the wedding, but meets with the father in his office and actually just wants the $39.60 for the different gasoline expenses and the different items that he lost along the way. He doesn't want the reward. And he thinks that Ellie confessed his love, kind of used him to get him all the way to New York, and then is now still going to marry this Wesley guy. And he then confesses his love to Ellie to the father. So now the father knows that both of them hate each other, but they both love each other, and there's just this big misunderstanding. So he tries to talk to Ellie, and Peter and Ellie kind of bump into each other in the hallway, and he says something nasty, and she doesn't want to see him anymore, and so he leaves. So then we cut to the wedding scene, and the father's walking Ellie down the aisle, and he says, you know, he loves you. He told me he loves you. All he wanted was the gas money. He said, I have a car waiting for you. You can go to him. You don't have to marry this guy. He says, I don't like King Wesley. He's only in it for a paycheck. I can buy this guy out. Just take it and run. So they get to the altar and it kind of looks like they're going to get married. And just before she says, I do, she takes off across the yard as fast as she can, dress and veil flying in the wind, hops in this car and speeds off. And then Wesley kind of goes up to the father and he says, do you know what happened? And he's like, I have no idea at all. And then we jump to a little scene where the father has now paid off Wesley so he doesn't contest the annulment. And Ellie and Peter have gone and they've eloped and they're staying overnight at one of the cabins from the first night for their honeymoon. And the couple that owns the cabin is saying like, oh, I don't think they're really like newlyweds. And they requested like a small trumpet and a string for a blanket to hang between them. And then, of course, it kind of pans over and you hear the trumpet blowing and then the blanket hit the ground, you see, so it sort of suggests what's going to happen next. And that's how the film ends. So, of course, that's a reference to the biblical story, of course, that Peter has in fact reached the promised land. This film, it's really fun. It's really kind of silly. It's acted well. It's written well. It's directed well. The dialogue's clean cut. It's just fun. Like this movie isn't going to change your life. There's not this gut punch emotion, but it is the basis in which I think we should judge all romantic comedies. It's fun. It's written well. The characters are really likable. They're well-rounded. It is just really funny. Definitely if you're getting into black and white movies or you have someone in your life that's, you love black and white movies, but they haven't really seen them, it's a good one to start with. It's easy to understand. The characters are really likable. You don't have to understand a ton about the way the world was in 1934 for the film to make sense. There isn't like a ton of obscure references that don't have any context anymore. The film could be shot now. It could have been shot in 1960. It could be shot in 1934, 1975. Like, it doesn't matter. This film has a story that is applicable through all time periods. Even though it's 91 years old, we haven't aged out of this film. Other than maybe the guy slapping his daughter, but that's about it. Everything that is relevant then is relevant now that happens within the film. So it's just fun. It's a good movie. If you want to feel good, it's very light. It's an hour and 40 minutes. Like, it's just a great kind of Saturday afternoon watch. My husband and I watched it yesterday when my daughter was napping. It was great. Yeah, so I'm going to be in your ears tomorrow. So please tune into that bonus episode for True Romance. So happy February 13th, everybody. And I'll chat with you tomorrow.